Yeah. We live. So excited for this show tonight. Hopefully the live stream is picking up everywhere. We're going to get into the content here pretty quick. Oh, my goal thing's not working. Let me fix that. Fixed. I think chats are going to show up at the top right, which is good. That's what we want. Facebook stream is up. Looks good. Check the YouTube stream. Oh yeah, it's good too. Get in there. Bum, ba, bum, bum. Little delayed on the websites, I think, but that's all right. Is anybody here? Say hi in chat if you're here. We're getting ready to start this thing. We're gonna talk about all kinds of fun stuff tonight. I'm so excited. Harris Heller bringing in the show tonight with the stream beats. Always solid. Harris Heller. Hey, what's up, Jessica? Thanks for saying hi. Appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for the follow, Haas. Appreciate it. Well, now we're off and rolling. I love it. Now we are off and rolling. I think I've got everything pulled up the way I want it. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. This is going to be probably the longest solo stream I will ever do. Usually I like to have guests and talk about different topics and current events, but tonight's a little bit different. Tonight is the culmination of really 5+ years of my thinking and engaging and learning about the nature of relationships, including my own and mistakes I've made there. I gotta fix my camera real quick. That's really bouncy. Hopefully that fixes it. But it's gosh, there's so much to talk about on this topic and so much to think about. And the real thing is, what does it take to avoid the problem of cheating? And you might think, I'll never be somebody who cheats like I once did. You might think, I won't be in a relationship where someone won't cheat on me. I won't allow it. I totally understand that sentiment, and a lot of people that I have talked to have it. You might think that you'll never want love outside your current relationship. There's a lot of things you might think. And I'm not here to challenge your thinking. I'm here to open your mind tonight. We're going to talk about how some of these concepts can break down. And they can break down really quickly when you just stop to think about them and you learn about some of the history and different things like that. So that's going to be the focus as we fade the music out here. We're going to get into the show and talk about this stuff. I put together this really, really, really long presentation. Hopefully somebody can let me know in chat if it looks good on your screens. That would be awesome. And if you can see everything, or if it's ever blocked, just tell me in chat. You can make fun of me for this PowerPoint. I will not be offended. Visually, it probably sucks at times, and there's a lot of blocky information on there. I'll be honest, 80 to 90% of the existence of this PowerPoint is so that I don't jump around and I actually talk about things in the linear fashion that I wanted to. I spent about 7 hours putting this together and gathering some information. I do have some cool data and some different stuff that I think will be worth checking out for sure. But we're going to talk about monogamy, the digital age, and what does it mean to cheat in your relationships. So without further ado, let's jump in. I started questioning the structure of relationships probably really heavily about 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. But even a little bit before that, I had some preconceived ideas of what I thought I wanted in relationships and what I thought would always hold true for me. But this is an example of some of the questions that I'm seeking to answer tonight. These first questions are the ones that are at the core of the discussion. Is monogamy real? I started to question that because of personal feelings that I had in just knowing the statistics about how many people cheat, how often this becomes a problem in relationships, how often people change relationships, how short relationships last. Like, I just wasn't sure if monogamy was even real. I recently thought a lot about whether or not it should even be something that we encourage. I thought about, is this something that most people even want? Do they think they want it, but not know that they actually want something different, as evidenced by all their cheating, right? Like, that seems to be so commonplace. And along with that, like, how many people exactly are cheating? How do we define it? Can you cheat on relationships that aren't romantic or just friendships? Is there even a difference between friendships and romantic relationships? Sometimes those lines get blurred. I had started hearing about the concept of polyamory, and I had questioned if that could even work in a culture that seems so ingrained in monogamous thinking, or what we call monogamy. And then about a year and a half ago, I learned about this concept. It's a metaphor called a relationship escalator. And that really, really started to add to my thinking on this and open my mind. So I wanted to talk about that tonight as well. And what it means to cheat, and whether or not people in open relationships can still cheat. You know, like, what does that all break down to? So that's kind of the main questions we're going to seek to answer tonight. Hopefully you'll stay with me, or, come back when you can. It's going to be a long conversation. I'm going to put the whole recording up on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube down the line, thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to jump in if you're live here with me and chat with me about this stuff. So, monogamy and infidelity. It's such a weird dynamic, because relationship exclusivity is universally practiced, but it also seems to be universally violated. Like, very few people that you meet never experience some kind of breakdown of their relationship trust. And yeah, people define cheating differently, and part of that has to do with we've changed what we mean by monogamy over time in various ways. We used to have one mate for life. Now we have one mate at a time and practice like serial monogamy, where we're monogamous with that one person for a while until we're not. And then we change it and we swap them out and we change relationships. Before the institution of modern monogamy, when monogamy was more of an economic affair, we used to seek out true love with affairs, but now that's what we seek from our long-term deep relationships. And that's a thing that I think a lot of people aren't really aware of, so we're going to talk about the history of that. And I can't recommend enough. Esther Perel has a TED Talk about this that's for anyone who's ever loved. That's about infidelity and cheating. And I really think that everyone should check it out. It's only about 20 minutes, but it's a springboard for thinking about relationships like I am in this way. First of all, what is the biological evidence for the institution of monogamy? Like, is there some kind of scientific reason? That was a really interesting question that I had. I was recently talking to a friend just the other day who actually thought that most large mammals were monogamous until I told him to Google it. It was actually pretty funny. Only 3 to 5% of mammalian species on Earth practice any form of monogamy. And we are one such mammal. There are some other apes in apedom that do this as well. Interestingly enough, scientists agree that not one species has ever demonstrated to be truly forever monogamous. Even swans that pair bond for life occasionally stray, which we learned through DNA fingerprinting, which is kind of like a paternity test. Many species that were previously thought to be monogamous only practice social monogamy, which is like, we demonstrate to everybody else that we're socially monogamous. And I think that's really interesting. Basically, you're talking about a male and a female. They mate with one another, raise their offspring together, spend time together, but they do sometimes stray. Not all pair bonded couples, but some do. And it is an interesting evolutionary development. We think that it was high levels of infanticide from rival males created a pressure to prefer a one male to one female kind of arrangement. At least that's their theory in apes like ourselves. But there's been a lot of debate about this topic, about if there's any evolutionary grounds for the origin of monogamy. Yeah, so Jenny just said in chat, it's because of our wide emotion range, jealousy being a big reason for humans. That is a real factor, but it's actually, if you look from an evolutionary standpoint, the other way around. We evolved the sexual jealousy that we feel as kind of a facet of the reason why we feel all kinds of jealousy. It's designed to help promote our reproductive options. And so that's why there's this theory exists about infanticide from rival males. There's a selection pressure where our ancestors that preferred one male and one female had a better chance of survival because they had strength together as a unit. That gave them, more consistency of passing down their genes because we didn't have this infanticide problem. And so to help protect that institution, we evolved this jealous feeling, sexual jealousy. There's also the problem that large brain primates like ourselves have extra needy offspring. Our babies are born rather prematurely compared to other primates, even sometimes. But most mammals, right? Human babies, we've got to care for them. They're not ready to go off on their own for several years Whereas many mammalian species, it might be just a few weeks and they're ready to go off their own, in some case a few months. So that requires for our genes to continue to pass on. Dad's got to stick around a little bit more to make sure resources are gathered so his genes can be passed on to offspring down the road. So that's part of the evolution there. But it's important to note that this type of biological monogamy is very different than what's practiced today. Today, what we do in our society is, again, better described as serial monogamy, and it's entirely a social pressure. And we could talk about the origins of that social pressure from pop culture. I'm not going to get into a bunch of it because, quite frankly, I don't think it matters. I don't think it tells you a part of the story that really matters. No doubt about it, religion played a big role. No doubt about it, the romantic period, in which I am going to dive into, and kind of mixing individualist goals as a big part of this, of why we practice this serial monogamy now. But what we do is we say, I'm going to be exclusive with this one person until we mutually agree that we're not going to be exclusive. And as you guys probably know, like, that doesn't eliminate your problems, because a lot of times people still feel jealousy and still check up on their exes after the relationship, right? That kind of serial monogamy, what if somebody else ends it, but I didn't want it to end? And you have a conflict there, a conflict that has to be resolved. And people can be really upset about what their ex does after they split up. Clearly, all of this is very different than the biological monogamy that we see elsewhere in the animal kingdom. So I think that's important to note. How good are we at it? The numbers aren't good. The overall numbers on infidelity are crazy high. So I pulled this from a website that's all about relationships called hackspirit.com. They pulled statistics from a number of different journals. And the fascinating thing about this is you can't really give, like, if somebody just goes, how many people cheat? Well, who admits to it? And how many people define certain things as cheating? Most people who did cheat don't think they cheated, or, argue with their spouse about whether or not what they did was actually an act of infidelity. If not most, it's a significant number. So it's hard. You can't really put a number on it, and you'll see that the numbers vary widely. Some websites publish numbers, as you can see here on the screen. 40% of unmarried relationships and 25% of marriages have at least one incident of infidelity. That's still high. An estimate from the Journal of Marriage and Divorce concludes that a mind-blowing 70% of married Americans cheat at least once in their marriage. They don't see that number as reliable from this website, but what I can tell you is that even if the cheating doesn't occur, think about the fact that half of all marriages end in divorce. It's actually a little over half now. Usually that's because somebody decides they're ready for a new relationship, and maybe they don't want to betray the trust of their partner, so they just break it off, right? That's a factor too. Doesn't that really factor into the numbers here in terms of how successful we are at actually pulling off monogamy? I think it should be considered. The U.S. General Social Survey has a little bit lower of a number, 20% of men, 13% of women. I think that there's no way it's that low. I don't know if they're doing that basically only on like confirmed cheating, or depends on how they define it when they do some of these surveys. LA Intelligence Detective Agency has 30 to 60% of married couples will cheat at least once. 74% of men, 68% of women admit they cheat if it was guaranteed they would never get caught. That's the real number I think that matters for what I'm going to talk about tonight. If that's the truth, and 3/4 of all men and 68% of women admit that they would absolutely cheat if they could get away with it, are we really monogamous? Like what else is at play here? Why do so many people want to cheat? It's ubiquitous. It's as widespread as relationships are themselves, clearly. This number fascinated me. 60% of affairs start with close friends or coworkers, and the average affair lasts 2 years. That's a long time. That's like having a dual relationship. That's some double life shit. I don't even know how people could pull that off, maintaining that. Like, that's wild to me. And then 69% of marriages break up as a result of an affair as a result of an affair being discovered, meaning only about 30% survive the incident, which I think we should fix. And I think people should work harder to stay together, because affairs are an opportunity for relationship growth and don't mean the end of it. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'll get into my thoughts on some of this. I kind of summarize this by saying, what you see on the right side here, these numbers show we're not capable of practicing monogamy successfully, or at least not as it's imagined. At some point, no matter how good your relationship is, we have to confront the reality of infidelity or change our minds about what we view as infidelity. This reality is going to smack you in the face, whether you want it to or not, whether you try to avoid it or not. These numbers are too high, and there's too much of this going on for you to ignore this, which is why I hope you will share this, come follow, like, subscribe after I post the whole recording on YouTube, and have open and honest discussions with your partner if you're in a relationship, or with your friends that are in relationships, and allow me to open their minds a little bit. If you've already been surprised by some of this data, so was I when I first started looking into it, 100%. So there are a lot of different, part of the reason why the statistics are so hard to break down is there's so many different types of cheating that somebody can do, and we define it in different ways. So obviously we have physical affairs, which is where, sex and other physical contact is the affair. This is the one that we're tend to be most concerned with, but certainly number 2 is quickly climbing the ranks. The cyber affair. It's even weird to call this cyber anymore, but I do think that word still captures it, right? This is chat sex and sexting and Snapchats and online chat rooms. There's a lot of stuff that can go in that bucket. And what I find is couples don't talk about their boundaries when they get together and decide to go exclusive about what they consider acceptable online sex talk and what they don't. And people just assume what other people's boundaries are. And if those assumptions are wrong, people have problems very early on in their relationships because of this one. We've all heard of the emotional affair, right? Somebody having a loving relationship where they express deep levels of affection and start to confide in somebody else that they may or may not be sexually interested in, but they start to have a really deep connection to somebody else and prioritize that connection over their primary partner. That's the emotional affair. This next one, a lot of people don't think about, but object affairs are kind of a big deal. People can become in strong relationship and cheat with certain, objects in their life, whether it has to be, for some people, pornography is described as this. Maybe they're cheating through that angle. Maybe they're too obsessed with a hobby. Maybe they're spending too much time playing video games, which is something I've always struggled with in my relationships. Maybe they're doing things, whatever it is, they're prioritizing an object or a practice, some kind of thing, and they're putting that in priority over their partner. And then one that I've witnessed a lot is the financial cheating. And this has to do with, a lot of times, and this applies more to, couples that are more in the, final or legacy phase of their relationship where responsibilities have been intertwined. They move in together. Somebody starts hiding money and hiding what they're doing with money and not being honest and forthcoming. Or maybe they hit a bunch of debt and entered into a permanent relationship with somebody where it was expected that finances and responsibilities would be shared, but turns out they were lying about some things or maybe hiding them. You know, the financial affair could be a really, really big one too. I think the fascinating thing about all these is if you think that all of these are possible and it's capable to cheat in these ways, or maybe you don't see some of these as cheating and maybe sex is the only one that you're concerned with, it's clear that people can feel cheated for things that aren't merely physical. A lot of people think that open relationships and polyamory and things like that, like there isn't cheating in those relationships because that's the point of them. That's a very narrow focus where you think physical is the only part that matters. If you open up to the rest of the possible definitions of cheating, it's clear that there are a lot more ways to cheat on your relationship. But more on that later. Because it's so hard to define, I think I have come up with what is the bona fide best way to define it. I just realized I was still in the green room in my Discord. What's up, Duggan? Not even sure who that is, but welcome. I'm going to pop down to my actual live stream channel in case other people join the green room. All right. Fix that. So, in addition to there being all these different kinds of cheating and everybody defining it differently, what makes it even more complicated is when different people admit to it. For the people who have been cheated on or the people who admit to cheating, I think they agree that there are two key markers that every form of cheating has, which is some kind of dishonest behavior. That's one. That's an important one. Okay. And some kind of boundary being crossed, that it was expected that you would not do X, but you did it. I think both of those things have to occur for it to truly be cheating, an affair, that kind of thing. Sometimes boundaries get crossed in relationships and we tell our partner up front, I know you won't like this. I know you don't want me to do it, but I'm putting it all out there. I'm being perfectly open and honest with you. I'm going to play poker with the boys tomorrow. I don't know. It could be a bunch of different things, right? Not tips. A lot of times we're not willing to cross certain boundaries openly. Certainly the sex one, right? Sexual exclusivity. We're not going to just be like, I am going to sleep with Jennifer. I know you don't want me to, and I know you won't like it, but I'm just going to do it. I mean, you could do that. I wouldn't really call that cheating. Because probably what happens the minute after, if your partner's not down with that, is they go, well, then we're over. Bye. Deuces. Right? That marks the end of the relationship, but we talked about it first. The affair hasn't occurred. I really do think it has to be a boundary that got crossed in a dishonest way in the shadows. It was meant to be a secret. It was kept private. It was, the information was retained by the first party. In most cases with cheating, you have third party involvement. And in this case, that third party is typically a person, but obviously, as we talked about, it could be an object. It can be an institution like pornography, that kind of thing. Here's what fascinated me when I was looking into the stats on this. 70% of couples, before they commit in a serious way and go exclusive, do not talk about their boundaries and what constitutes cheating for them at all. It's just assumed. We have data on this. I got this data from that same website I mentioned earlier. But on top of that, only 5% think that they will be cheated on. That's like inventing a rule, imagining it to yourself, and then just expecting your partner to know what the rule is and not sharing it, and then being like 95% sure that it won't get crossed and the rule won't get broken. I mean, that's clearly insane. Clearly insane. So that kind of blew my mind. So that led me to this. This is a website. I pulled these cut and paste from a website that's from a therapist who works with like different affairs and stuff like that. And this is just kind of a answer to all of the different myths. And I did cut and paste verbatim, which hopefully I don't get in trouble for from the website. But I felt like these were really, really well written. First myth is that affairs happen because of sexual attraction. That is clearly too limited based on our previous slide. Lots can cause you to cheat on your partner. More commonly than sex, it's emotional needs that are unfulfilled. And that's for men and women. That's definitely the case most often, is unfulfilled emotional needs. There's the big myth that affairs only happen, because people get older, become used to each other, they're looking for something to spice things up. But what's blowing the minds of some psychologists and making people question is that affairs for people under the age of 30 is going up and up and up. Probably in part because of hookup culture. It's hard to kind of like just put the brakes on that and then get into a monogamous situation. It's also the fact that it's way easier to get away with now in the digital age. So, the odds of somebody doing this, like if 75% of men and 68% of women are likely to cheat if they knew they couldn't get caught, the digital age certainly gives us a lot of reassurance that we won't get caught. There's a lot of ways to hide. So I think that contributes to this for sure. Another one is this myth, and this is what I just mentioned earlier, like divorcing or leaving is the best way to put this all behind you. This blew my mind. Surveys have indicated that almost 8 out of 10 partners who divorced because of an affair regret the decision. And this fact coincides somewhat with what many surveys of divorced couples go through in general. Divorce is horrible. And I've been through divorce. It's painful. A lot of times people regret it or try to get back together or go back and forth or on the fence about it. There's so much of your life that's intertwined. Even ending long-term relationships that weren't, quote, married can be very stressful and very challenging. So, it's just kind of important to remember that divorce is no picnic, and it's not always the best way to do this. If 8 out of 10 people are going to regret it, maybe the thing to do is figure out what's actually going on underneath the surface of the infidelity, This is a big myth that affairs only happen in unhappy or troubled marriages. This is just... First of all, how do you define an unhappy or a troubled marriage, right? Like, that's already difficult. So that's clearly a tough marker. But the more important thing is even in the surveys that we have, it definitely happens in good marriages. It definitely happens when we're happy. And it's definitely something that can happen to men or women regardless if the circumstances come together in a right. Again, we're talking about 70% if they think they won't get caught would do it. Let me catch up with what Jen said here. She's okay with somebody getting their physical needs taken care of as long as they don't emotionally cheat on you. I've reached the fact that I'm asexual last year. After forcing myself to try and enjoy it and like it, I just don't. Never want to do that again, but I know that's not logical for sexual humans. And that is a big challenge that people face. And I actually really appreciate that perspective, Jen, because this is a thing a lot of people don't think about. What happens to somebody who becomes disabled in a relationship and needs sex outside of the relationship? Would you constitute that as cheating? Like, it's clearly more than physical. But on that part of what the emotional cheating is, there are some myths about that too that I'm going to break down in a little while. So I hope you stick around, and if you can't, catch the recording later. Let's myths continued here. Sometimes people think this is because the unfaithful partner is less interested or think that the less interested partner at home is evidence of an affair happening, right? Oh, they don't want sex at home or whatever. Turns out, once somebody starts cheating and having that passion, they get a little hornier at home too. I actually think that's really funny. But it is accurate from a personal experience that I had that I won't go into details on the show, but I've experienced where you could be being faithful and then something really spices something up outside, and then you become much more into the idea of more sex at home with your committed partner. Obviously, we've talked about this briefly, the myth that men are having the affairs. In general, it is slightly more than women, but as equality has gotten better for women, it's becoming more and more statistically equal all the time. And now women are thought to comprise about 40% of all infidelities. So it could also be that women are less likely to report it too, but it's definitely becoming a more equal thing. Some people think that affairs or infidelity happens because the spouse is looking for it. And that's clearly a myth. Sometimes it's really hard to accept that a partner decided to have sex or an emotional relationship with somebody randomly or by accident, or that they weren't seeking it. But that's actually what happens more of the time, where feelings start to develop with somebody, and it's a lot of times it's a close friend, a coworker, something they didn't expect, and passion takes over. And that's not at all what they set out to. There's also the one night stand situation, where it's people who work on the road, happens all the time. Like, meet somebody, have some crazy thing happen, and then go home and have to sort out the details. So that's clearly a myth. Another myth is that unfaithful partners are looking out a younger, better looking person. A lot of times affairs happen between same age couples or people who would not be considered, conventionally more beautiful than their spouse. He references from this website here, Prince Charles and his long affair with Camilla Parker Bowles to come to mind. Yeah, that this is just for sure the case, right? This is not all about beauty. There's something else at play here that makes people want to cheat. And it's not just about, I'm looking for something better, I'm looking for something more. It's just, I'm looking for something. Or I wasn't looking for something, but I found it, in the case of what we just talked about. And then that last myth made me laugh. Everyone has affairs. It's probably about 40 to 45%. I think if you're looking at the numbers ranging from 25 to 75, I think it's fair to say it probably splits the difference, right? The truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's roughly around half, for sure. So, that's some myths about infidelity. Let me, I wanted to talk about, we mentioned it earlier, that monogamy and exclusivity in relationships changed. But I wanted to talk about how they've changed and why they have changed. And a lot of people don't realize that our popular modern conception of monogamy is only really like a few hundred years old. So Plato, all the way, some 2,500 years ago, argued that the highest form of love was actually a brotherly love. And being that he was one of the most influential thinkers of his day in Greece, I find it interesting that he looked at it this way. He looked at passion and romance as something that would just lead to regretful actions, and that a passionless love between two close friends was a much, much higher and much more fulfilling experience. This is the reigning thought around monogamy everywhere in the world. This was not about love. It was an economic institution, right? So that part doesn't really happen until the Romantic period. If you're not familiar with the Romantic period of art, it's pretty important, but it also mixed with the realities of the Industrial Age and the Enlightenment pursuits, all kind of got blended into there over a couple hundred years. Marriages didn't need to be economic institutions anymore. Farming wasn't the primary way to make money. Kids could go to the city and get an individual job at a factory and make money that way, make their own way. And then we have this Enlightenment period where we emphasize the individual, pursuit of happiness, follow your dreams, put everything together, get on that bus and go to the city and live your life and find love and everything. And it's that Romantic period, right? Pop culture doubles down on this for like 300 years. Romance becomes the primary novel, the main stories that we read. Once movies come out, it gets more and more intense. It's really hard in modern art, post-Romantic period, to sell the old school hard work side of building a really strong relationship. That just doesn't translate to a TV screen in any real way. It's like, what do I want to work hard for? I just want to see the part where he gets the girl and they kiss and they ride out into the sunset. That's what I need. Give me the love story, That's a really hard sell. And so it gets just baked into all of the culture for 300 years. But along with it, because relationships went back to being so much more passionate and so full of love, they weren't economic institutions, we also bring out toxic relationships where people get permanently entangled with people that are actually harming them. And because of fear of loss and they don't want to lose, mutual responsibilities that everybody can take care of, people stay in bad relationships. They get into bad relationships and they don't want to deal with this anxiety of having to deal with this on their own and having that individual responsibility. So that's everything that happens after the Romantic period. But before it, we had evolutionary reasons to be monogamous, right? So we were monogamous. It was just functioned differently. These things were encouraged to, help us survive and reproduce, but aren't really based on rational factors. For most of human history, that we care about, right? And the, once we actually started building industry and cities and societies, marriage is all about economics. If I'm in a monogamous marriage where I know for sure that those children are mine because she's only been with me, then I can guarantee that my offspring will carry my inheritance, continue to till the land we live on, and this is reinforced for generations over and over and over again. It's this inheritance stream, right, where wealth is transferred, and this is true because farming is the primary way that people work. It's the way that income is generated. It's the way that wealth is built. And another way to think about it is monogamy is important and marriage is important so that we can sort and keep beneficial. Like, we got to understand who's going to get the cows at the end of the day, right? So instead, what we see in the literature and the history before all of the romantic period and everything was true love was only sought after in affairs. This is where people actually went to seek out that type of passionate romance. And they did, and they wrote about it. But it was shunned by society. Because, again, if you think Romeo and Juliet, it's like, this isn't what the families want. This isn't what, these two aren't supposed to be together. There's too many economic problems. There's too many issues with it. This romantic, passionate love was something the kids did, So instead, once people were into their later adult lives, they would seek out affairs to kind of recapture that youthful, passionate love that they were looking for. And I found this fascinating when I was researching this. In some language, the word for love is more like the word affair. In Chinese, I think it was, when it relates to old people or young people, it's kind of a negative connotation of this like wild and crazy passionate love. And then when it refers to old people, it's actually a more shameful word, meaning affair. And I don't know which version of Chinese that was. It was a website that I read. I'm sure somebody will correct me down the road in the comments. So, learning all this brought me to some conclusions. And you might draw different conclusions than me, and that's fine. Maybe you'll come around to some of these as I have, but I've been mulling this over for a long time. The first conclusion is that no matter how hard you try, no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how much time you spend, you're not avoiding this problem. Monogamy, as most people think of it, is a bad bet. If you went into the casino and you just bet over and over again on the roulette wheel of relationship of we're together for life, okay, I'm going to bet on never get cheated on, you would be losing your ass. You're not going to make a lot of money. That's just the reality of it. It's a bad bet. It's so rare. My next conclusion that I draw is that, and this was from the earlier point, but if cheating can happen in all these different ways, some of it is physical, some of it emotional, some of it not, no matter what, the real problem here is honesty. Dishonesty is the real evil facing any relationship. No matter how scary it is, no matter how afraid you might be of your partner's reaction, if you think something, if you feel something, you need to tell them. You have to be honest and open and upfront and true. It's so clear. Another thing regarding this earlier slide, the next conclusion is that you have to talk about your boundaries in a relationship up front. They do no good to anybody, including yourself, if you keep them to yourself and you don't talk about what is a line that shouldn't be crossed for you. You have to have deep conversations early in your relationship, hard conversations, probably uncomfortable ones, because you're going to find places where your boundaries aren't aligned and people want the freedom to cross them. But you have to make sure each person understands and accepts what the other person's boundaries are. And this may be a little bit of a negotiation. Part of a relationship is you don't get to keep every single boundary that you want in your life. And you don't just get to tell somebody else that they have to honor every boundary that you've set up. Getting the other person to accept them 100% is completely insane. It's just not going to happen. If you want your long-term relationship to work, you're going to have to give some stuff up. You're going to have to make some sacrifices and trust that the relationship can withstand some of that discomfort and angst, and trust that the overall enterprise and the thing that you're working towards is worth being a little bit more flexible and a little bit more open and a little bit more honest. But if you can do that and put your cards on the table from the beginning, your chances of success in your relationship go way higher. You have to have these discussions. It's disaster when you don't. I'm going to grab a drink before we continue, but I hope you've learned something so far. I forgot what it was like to talk straight through for this long. It's kind of exhausting. I'm used to having a guest on the show. So, what's next? I do love talking. That is a fact, Jen. I had a sneaky feeling that younger generations were the most insecure in history, especially when it came to their close relationships. And this sneaking suspicion started to really dig at me. And it turns out Pew Research Center, apparently my Boston accent came out there, has some really good data on this. So you're seeing this on your screen. 33% of social media users who are single and looking say that seeing relationship posts make them feel worse about their dating life. They feel bad that other people are happy. They feel bad that other people are in relationships, and it makes them feel bad that they haven't found what they're looking for. That's pretty alarming. 87% say they at least sometimes see posts about other people's relationships on social media. We love to post about our relationships on social media. Only 4% say that it makes them feel better about their own dating life. 33% say it makes it worse. And 62% says it doesn't make a difference. It's clear that our sharing about relationships on social media in general makes people feel worse. And there's some other data on this, but that was the one regarding single people that I thought was the most interesting. So then I was curious if sexual jealousy has gone up in the digital age, right? Are young people struggling more with being worried about what their partners are up to on their social media? And sure enough, Pew Research backs that up completely. About 1/4 of partnered Americans say their partner's social media has made them feel jealous or unsure about their relationship. But the important thing is it's 34% for ages 18 through 29, 26% for ages 30 to 49, down to 19% for ages 50 to 64, and only 44% of seniors say that this affects them and makes them feel jealous. There's a clear ladder where as you get younger, social media is making people feel more jealous, more unsure, which would coincide with what we already know about social media usage. It's a lot higher the younger you get. It's a lot more diverse the younger you get. There's so many different kinds of social media we're using, right? So it's clear, you can see a clear pattern where social media use is going up and people are feeling more and more jealous about their relationships as a result of their social media use. That's a type of infidelity risk, right? This is about relationship insecurity. This is about not feeling like you can trust your partner. A majority of Americans think it's unacceptable for someone to look through their partner's phone without their knowledge. There's a fascinating reverse situation happening here where as you get younger, you are concerned less and less with thinking that this is an unacceptable practice, because we know that our devices are ways that people tend to, that's our engine of our infidelity, right? That's where we go to have these things, is on our cell phones. That's where we communicate with the outside world. So as you get younger, people are less and less offended by this idea, but they're also most likely to do it. About 1 in 3 Americans overall who are in a romantic relationship say that they look through their partner's phone without that person's knowledge. But look at the numbers again. Ages 18 to 29, 52% are going through their partner's phone. Like, hey, what are you doing? What's up? 41% of people ages 30 to 49. 29% for 50 to 64, and only 13% for seniors. So as we get younger and we're getting more paranoid and we're more skeptical of our partners, and we don't trust that they're telling us that what they're doing is legit, we're checking up on them. We're sneaking through their shit. We want to know, are you cheating on me? Will your phone tell me that you're cheating on me? Here's my thoughts on this. I think this is a pervasive problem. A perverse problem. Jealousy and insecurity in relationships will destroy your relationships. We know that, and yet we can't help ourselves. We know that being overly jealous only pushes people further away, makes them less likely to stay committed, makes it harder for them to, engage with us honestly, and yet we breathe down each other's necks. Again, 52% of 19 to 29-year-olds going through the phones, 40% of 30 to 45-year-olds. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. As I mentioned earlier, jealousy, like every other emotion, is an evolutionary design. We got our emotions, anger and sadness and hate and malice and jealousy and, curiousness and awe. These all have an evolutionary function. They're here for a reason. They motivate us towards our goals and certain behaviors. Sexual jealousy is a product of the reproductive fitness of monogamy. But again, we're not really practicing monogamy in the evolutionary sense anymore. We've established that. What we're doing looks nothing like evolutionary monogamy. And in fact, most species that practice evolutionary monogamy have more or less open relationships where occasionally they're getting a little boom boom on the side, right? So jealousy's there to caution us against that, to warn us against that, to try and protect that. But is it doing that because it's reliable? No, the only thing it cares about is whether or not the kids are ours. Jealousy got invented long before birth control and condoms and the morning after pill and abortions and everything else. Like, a modern reproductive science is so good, and yet this jealousy came from a time when none of that was accurate. So you had to be worried that if your partner was messing around, the kids that come later might not be your DNA. And then you haven't passed on your genes and you have failed to be evolutionary fit. This is the thing that gave us jealousy, okay? We know and we understand and we tend to accept that other emotions cause us to behave in really self-destructive ways, and we avoid acting on their behalf. We even use language like this, right? We say, listen, I don't want to act out of anger. I'm going to wait till I calm down. Look, I know I'm really sad right now, and I'm just going to bring you down if I go out. So I'm going to stay home. We also know that even extreme happiness or positive emotions can sometimes be self-destructive if that's all we ever pursue, because then we get hooked on drugs and different other issues, right? Like, if you're pursuing pleasure all the time, it might pull you away from your responsibilities. That's a version of a self-destructive behavior as a result of emotions. We understand that extreme behavior based on extreme emotions can lead us to harms, like violence and self-destructive thoughts and addiction, but we don't do this with jealousy. We ignore jealousy altogether. We follow jealousy, especially in my generation, those young people, those, people between 20 and 35 right now. We follow jealousy off of a freaking cliff. We double down on partner expectations. We want full access to every inch of your life. You don't get to have anything private. You don't get to look at other people in any kind of sexual way. And some couples have gone to extremes that I have seen where they make their partner delete all their social media, get rid of your Snapchats, get rid of your I want to know who you're texting. I want to know who's on Facebook Messenger. I need all of it. And don't even let me catch you talking to the opposite sex. Does that seem healthy? Does that seem like a way to establish trust and build a long-term relationship? Or does that seem like it falls more in the self-destructive bucket? I know what my answer is. It's one that people got to decide for themselves, but there's no way that's healthy, and you'll justify it to yourself in a million ways. Oh, he gave me a reason not to trust him. She gave me a reason not to trust her. Did they really? Does that justify invading every inch of their life and thinking that that's a successful path for a healthy relationship? Or maybe do you think having some discussion and open and honest conversation about why somebody has other needs and other desires and feels the need to, have private information, maybe that should get discussed. If we can learn not to overreact to our anger and sadness, we can clearly learn to do the same with jealousy, but it takes effort and time. We start learning as young children how to manage anger, how to manage sadness, right? We tell our kids, you're sad, toughen up. Sometimes bad things happen, but you'll get through this. There'll be a brighter day. We start learning that at very, very young ages. The first time you lose a toy you really cared about. We start learning how to curb our anger and how to not act poorly with our anger at a very early age. But this type of sexual jealousy doesn't kick in until our reproductive engines kick in. And by then, we've ditched most of our parental oversight. So who's there to teach us to not react so strongly to our jealousy? If you still have a good relationship with your parents that are open and honest and are willing to let you have relationships and negotiate them yourself, maybe they're there to help you. But for most people that don't have that, the parents don't want to know about your teenage relationships. They just see them as a threat. They just worry about what this means for your future and if you're getting too distracted. Parents handle these very poorly. Very, very poorly they handle the young teen relationships. Instead, teaching your kids how to build healthy ones, what would that look like? Don't you think it would include explaining to them that, whoa, why are you trying to invade your boyfriend's privacy like that? Like, you don't have to go through everything on your phone. Don't you think he likes you? Don't you think that he's excited about the relationship? Then trust him a little bit. Give him a chance. That would be a part of the discussion. I can't imagine telling my kids, like, you should investigate everything. Get all his records. Every last message. You need it all. That's clearly ridiculous. We wouldn't do that. So I think this is pretty clear that we need to back off of this extreme reaction to jealousy. And we're going to have to teach it to ourselves because no one was there to teach it to us. Especially if you're a millennial right now, between the ages of, say, 25 and 40. We grew up with the digital age and everything was online and all this stuff hit us at 1,000,000 miles a minute and it evolved faster than we could evolve with it. And this is very hard to curb. I empathize with it. I've been in your shoes. I understand the jealous feelings. And I promise you, opening up, letting go, and having a little bit more faith in the relationships you've built could be one of the best things you can do for them. Another challenge that we face, and this is from that a similar source, is that compared to any other generation, we are the least likely, millennials and Gen Zs, to report very good or excellent mental health. So we're dealing with all-time highs in terms of anxiety and depression and other mental illness, but those are the two most common. And those anxieties and that sense of low self-esteem and the struggles that come with it lead to us being in a panic state, lead to us being into a unstable state where we question the relationships around us. We question our security. We question our sanity. And we want that locked in feeling. We want to know that everything's on the up and up. And this is adding to the problem. So not only do you have to work against the fact that you didn't learn how to curb your jealousy and how to put your jealousy in the proper box that it should be in, we're fighting against periods of very, very high anxiety. Compared to any generation before us, we're worried about national news topics way more. We're exposed to mass shooting and suicide rates and climate change and global warming and existential threats to our planet. Issues like, families that are destroyed as a result of immigration and migration and refugees, which I'm sure we're looking at another refugee crisis very quickly coming out of Afghanistan. How much more widespread sexual harassment and all these assaults are reported. All of this adds up to our generation feeling like the future around us is very scary and very bad. And we need that security. And we look for it in a relationship. And so when our partner does things that we don't trust or that we're worried about, we freak out. We're like, let me see all your shit, man. Please. I need to see all of it because I don't feel secure. I need to know everything you've got going on because the rest of the world out there is overwhelming. And you're supposed to be my security amid all this. And I think that's putting a really negative pressure on relationships as well. This is a quote from Esther Perel about what we do in relationships. And I think it says a lot about what we're so insecure about. Today we have to give one person what an entire village used to provide. Financial and emotional support, companionship, entertainment, friendship, familiarity, mystery, love, sex, the works, which turns coupledom into a safety raft in a sea of loneliness and enemy. Dead on balls. We fear losing the support, security, and love that we now almost exclusively get from our partner. We've convinced ourselves that cheating means the necessary end of all of that, because if the person can't be trusted long term, then we're not going to get the security of having all of those things long term. And what's more is our identities have become intertwined with our romantic relationships. They're part of how we see ourselves in the world and how the world sees us. When it's an us, that becomes a necessary part of how others view you. And a lot of times people are very exclusively identified with their partners. And so as a result of that, we're afraid to lose that whole thing. That whole enterprise coming apart, that's worst case scenario. That's worst case scenario. So we have that whole anxiety working against us. And it's very hard with all of this front and center and camera forward to deal with all of this and not react to our jealousy in the worst possible way. And then it gets socially encouraged where, you go to your girlfriends and you're like, he's doing this. And they're like, you should go through his shit. Like that's what it is. We're all encouraged and encouraging each other to behave in this way. And it gets reinforced over and over again. It's driving us crazy. It's driving us crazy. And it's not limited to romantic relationships either. So I'm going to zoom out and we're going to get a little bit more philosophical here. We've talked about all the ways that somebody can cheat a romantic relationship. We've talked about how romantic relationships even came into existence, how marriages had nothing to do with romance, and we actually got a romance out of cheating. We've talked about how monogamy has gone from an economic institution to something that we serially do as a social reinforcement about our identities, and how we're getting more and more anxious about it because it's clearly an impossible goal to attain. So let's get even deeper than that and explore what I explored. This is a really, really tough question. What makes a relationship a romance? What are the unique properties or lack of certain properties that makes a relationship romantic as opposed to any other relationship? And I think if you ask people this question, they really struggle to have a good answer. A lot of times you get the first one, which is sex and physical affection and some kind of thing like that. Well, I have two counter examples that blow that out of the water. Number one, sister love. And I don't just mean among biological sisters. I mean, y'all girls love each other a lot. And I appreciate it. I really do. But you're very physically affectionate with each other. You cuddle. You do things that men don't get to do, and I'm sad about it. You guys show all kinds of physical affection for each other in a really deep way that would imply an emotional relationship that if I did that with another man, you'd be like, is he gay? Because that's where we're at in our society. It's shunned for men to have that type of physical affection with one another. And then you've also got hookup culture, right? Like, hookup culture just drives a truck through physicality being the unique thing that makes a relationship romantic. If it's possible for two people to talk on Tinder for 5 minutes, meet up and bone, and then part ways never to see each other again, clearly physical sex and physical engagement has absolutely nothing to do with actually making a relationship romantic. Now, relationships have, yes, and Jen points out, in Western society, it's shunned for men, but it's common in Japan and Korea. It's also why men in Japan and Korea are much happier than men here in the West, in a lot of different ways, in my opinion, because we have made a culture that makes it very hard for men to express affection, and it makes us feel very lonely and very disengaged, which is part of why the highest suicide rates are for men in their 50s plus right now. It's something that I'm really deeply, deeply concerned about. But I think the culture around monogamy pushes a lot of this too. I'm getting dry mouth. So physical's out. I think it's pretty obvious physical's out. Do you think that there's something else that makes a relationship romantic? Some kind of magical property? I don't see it. If it exists, I don't know what it is. I think when we talk about a romantic relationship, we're talking about one that has more frequency and more intensity than our other friendships. It's just like a really good friendship with more intimacy, more intensity, and you participate in it more often than you do with your friends. But I'm sure all of us can think of an example of two friends that seem closer than some couples. They just don't have sex. Maybe they do sometimes. Maybe they want to. My point that I'm eventually going to make is, who cares? There is no real difference between romantic relationships and other relationships. Shared responsibilities is one that could happen down the line, which we'll talk about. But even shared responsibilities, I mean, two friends who really love each other, who move in together and become roommates, tend to help each other out with different ways with responsibilities. Even that doesn't really get at it. So let's ask some philosophical questions. The dictionary definition of romantic is as follows: conducive to or characterized by the expression of love. By God, if you don't have that in your other relationships besides your one significant other, I feel bad for you. I mean that honestly. You should have expression of love in all your relationships that deserve it. You should be able to express love to your friends, to your family, to your children, to everybody. If this is the only dictionary definition of what makes romantic, unique, oh boy. I think it's pretty clear that labeled relationships can be more or less romantic than a really good friendship. Which begs the question, can I be cheated on by my wife with her best friend? Can she start cheating on me even if they're not sexually involved? I think yes, depending on what your expectations are, depending on what your boundaries are. If she's doing things that cross your boundaries and go behind your back and she's not honest about it. Now, what's the difference between these two things? Typically, women have this attitude of, you don't get to fucking touch what me and my girls do because that's girl time and you can get the fuck out of here. And men go, all right, not going to argue with that. Some men try to. Some men don't like it. But the thing is because it's expressed up front, you wouldn't see this as cheating. Meanwhile, if she started doing that with somebody who was of the opposite sex, even if there was no actual sex being involved, even if there was no physical contact being involved, you're like, I don't really like how close that's getting. That makes me uncomfortable. Why? Why are they different? Inherent gender bias, maybe? There's a lot of questions to be asked there. Save those for later. What unique properties make something a couple different than another relationship? Again, you could go into shared responsibility, move in together, things like that, but long-term friendships can often have some of those same qualities. So I don't know that there is anything uniquely different other than what we're talking about is frequency and intensity. Obviously, people can have physical contact with people that is, no relationship at all. They can make out in the club and, fucking go hook up at night and then, hookup culture ensues and they walk away, never speak to each other again. And people can do this and dance in really sexually seeming ways and stuff like that out in, all of that should be taken into consideration when you're considering what does it mean to be cheated on in my romantic relationship. These are the questions I started asking myself. In light of all of that, does it really make much sense to be so outraged by physical cheating? Should I be more outraged by how much time she's spending with her friends, he's spending with his friends? The stigma around male physical contact makes male bonded friendships seem not really romantic. But a really good friendship between men, it can be just as romantic as a couple relationship. Should you be worried about that? Friends that have girlfriends are often much more like romantic relationships than male friendships. They just stop just short of sex, and they don't always do that. I mean, we've seen that happen. I mean, I've read stories. I've often heard people say that sex is the ultimate expression of love. But if that's the case, why can people do it so freely and easily and instantaneously? And sometimes they can deeply love people and never do it at all. Or maybe they're asexual like Jen here. And that's just not a part of it. Is Jen being asexual or maybe not wanting sex, does that mean that she's not as committed to her partner, not as involved romantically? I say sex has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. Sex and relationships, two totally different things. Completely different. They've just got nothing to do with each other. The only correlation that can be made is if the more romantic our relationship is, which is the more frequent, the more intense, the more likely we are to engage in frequent sexual intercourse. That's about the only thing that I think is quote unquote safe to say. Everything else is circumstantial. If there's nothing unique that makes a romance, and it's on some kind of scale, it reminds me of the famous, I don't remember what Supreme Court justice it was that said this, but it was pornography. It's hard to describe exactly, but you know it when you see it. That is the subjective take that I think that we tend to have regarding relationships. We don't know exactly how to describe it. We couldn't tell you exactly the moment that we started to fall in love with our significant other, but you know it when you see it. And you're pretty unmistaken about it. Isn't that true of our friendships? Isn't that true of our other relationships as well? I think so. If there isn't any one type of behavior or characteristic that makes a relationship romantic, it obviously follows that physical contact alone doesn't make the relationship romantic. Which means don't be so offended by it. If somebody has a physical affair, it truly could mean nothing. That's the bold claim that all of this added up to for me. And it's the hardest one for people to swallow because all of pop culture says, ooh, if she cheats, there's the door. If he cheats, fuck him. All of pop culture sings that tune. That physical affair is the worst thing that you could ever do to your partner. What I am here to tell you is that lying is the worst thing that you could ever do to your partner. Yes, I'm suggesting that if you're honest with your partner, there's a place to stand where you can have love and connection and sex with other human beings and have it actually not affect your relationship. It's the dishonesty. It's the lying that's wrong. It's the lying that's wrong. And that's the real root of what an affair is. So it follows again that any type of affair that someone could have, what should we judge the affair on? Should we say, well, they had sex outside of the relationship, so fuck it, flip the table, it's over? No. What is the severity of the deceit? How about the threat to the long-term stability of your relationship? How about the willingness to change and evolve and be more open? Can you have a new relationship emerge with a structure that two people agree on, and maybe we discuss boundaries that we never discussed before? There is a way to heal from infidelity, and many couples do. Many couples do. So if it's possible that somebody had sex outside of the relationship and they can stay together and that works for some people, then clearly we don't care about being monogamous. I mean, that's my take, is we're not actually monogamous. No one is. We just aren't monogamous creatures, really. We frequently violate everything about monogamy. We don't even know what we mean by it. We're completely clueless as to the structure of relationships. We don't establish what the boundaries of our monogamous exclusive relationships are going to be when we start them. We're completely lost in the weeds on this as a society, as a people. And this is the first door you can step through to having a new, more open understanding of how to discuss things with your partner. Romances outside of the relationship should always be something you discuss, even if both people are monogamous and have the same view of how a relationship should be structured. You have to talk about it, you have to be open about it, and you have to make sure everybody is mutually understood. And the second you start feeling some type of way about somebody else, no matter how scary it is, you got to talk to your significant other and see what it means to you. Which leads to the next thing. And this is something that has become ingrained in our serially monogamous culture. This is a concept called the relationship escalator. This was created by Amy Guerin. I hope I'm saying her name right. I might not. I've never actually heard it said out loud. I've read her work and it's phenomenal. I've also watched YouTube videos and seen people say it 3 different ways. She created this concept quite a few years ago, and it explains the structure, since we just brought that up, the structure of how most people engage in their relationships. So I'm going to ask the question, if you're on, right now, a relationship escalator. The escalator is an assumed set of goals and structure for the relationship. We've all heard somebody ask in a relationship, new or otherwise, is this relationship going anywhere? That question is born out of the anxiety of wanting to know if both parties have the same end goal for that relationship. And not everybody does. Some people, their escalator ends at a different point. Some people prefer not to have an escalator at all. The problem is the relationship escalator is the current universal definition of how we look at whether or not a relationship is healthy, serious, and stable. We tend to be very, very negative towards relationships that don't follow this escalator. Maybe they move too fast. Maybe we think they skipped steps. Maybe they move too slow and we think they should just hurry up and get married and have kids already. All of that. We define how relationships are from the outside, and we judge people based on the relationship escalator. So what is it? It starts with contact, initiation, right? This is the flirting, the dating, sex, falling in love, frequently texting each other, all that early contact that starts a relationship. You haven't necessarily said we're in a relationship yet. We met a couple times, we hung out, we like each other, tee-hee, tee-hee. I text you eggplant emoji, you text me back a peach, that kind of shit. It's the flirting phase. Now, our generation has thrown sex in there as almost automatic. That's like the first thing we get out of the way. If he's bad in bed, I'm out of here. Got to find out. But we don't really define relationships until after that initiation and that contact period is over. And it lasts a different length of time for people. But what's the next level on the escalator? It's the defining phase. You create a label. You go exclusive. You delete the apps. You tell everybody in public. Maybe you make it Facebook official. You're out there. You've defined your relationship. We are boyfriend and girlfriend. We are exclusive. We are seeing each other. All of those kinds of words. Subsequently, this is the part where it's time to start talking about everything I have just talked about up until now. Getting our insecurities out there, getting our boundaries shared, understanding how we see a relationship to be. Two people typically come into a relationship and assume that the other person wants the same thing. They assume they both want the relationship escalator. That's why they have that question. Is this relationship going to go anywhere? If it doesn't develop quickly enough, maybe we're at different speeds of how fast we want our escalator to go, but we still both want the escalator. Maybe for me, I don't see myself staying on this escalator with you. I'm just here for some fun. But while the fun's going, we still want to define it and label it, so we do go exclusive and it's still enjoyable, but I don't think it's going much past that. A lot of relationships die here in the defining phase because we find out that our goals are different, our expectations don't match up. It's the ones that jump past this step without fully exploring it that I'm talking about that I see all the time. The next step is establishment. You develop patterns of seeing each other, develop patterns of contact, and start adapting to each other's lives. right? We hang out every week, 2 nights a week. We start going to the same bars. We start going to the same restaurant. We share activities together. You come over, we hang out, we pet my dog. I go to your place sometimes. Maybe we always go to my place because your place is a mess, you gross pig. Whatever. You develop these patterns, you adapt to each other's lives, and you do that. That's the establishment phase. Once you're here, you've locked in on the escalator. And yet so many people get to this step and they haven't discussed any of the things that we talked about before. Like if I even want to be on the escalator. What are your goals? And when do you want to accomplish them? How fast do you want to progress towards the ending phase of this? This is the risk and this is the problem. It's why so many young couples fail. So many new couples fail. So what happens after we get our relationship established? Commitment and merging. Getting engaged, discussing long-term goals, starting to share responsibility and merging our finances, maybe moving in together, right? That's the kind of merging we're talking about. And it's its own phase of the relationship. And it's what most people want to get to. The last step has become less important for many couples. But almost everybody in typical dating world sees this commitment and merging of our lives as the end goal. Even if they don't discuss it, they certainly operate that way. Where we discuss these shared responsibilities, that kind of thing. Beyond commitment and merging, the last step on the relationship escalator is the conclusion, the legacy, marriage, kids, mutually owning land, property. We do this until death or you fuck Fred or whatever. Death of the relationship or death of one of us. The relationship has been set in stone and that's where it stays until the relationship dies. There are way more alternatives to this relationship escalator. Non-monogamous alternatives and non-escalator alternatives. And I'm sure you've all seen on Tinder and Bumble and every dating site ever known to man. Not looking for anything serious. Not looking for anything serious, guys. I'm just here for a good time. Somebody who's not ready for a relationship escalator is saying that. They don't want to be on that yet. That's not what they're here for. That is a non-monogamous person. If you think the definition of monogamy is I'm not looking for anything serious, your definition's wrong. Like, this is what it is. A lot of people don't see cheating as a form of non-monogamy and non-escalator relationships, but it absolutely is. Having a mistress or having a mister? Absolutely. Like, and they know that this is not your intended goal. To make this relationship last and go down some escalator that ends up with conclusion where we buy a house together and live out Little House of the Prairie. We're just fucking around. Another way to think about cheating is defining it as non-consensual non-monogamy. Because it draws a contrast to consensual non-monogamy. Things like swinging and polyamory and polygamy and those kinds of things. Serial cheaters that have mistresses or misters, they want an additional relationship that they don't want long-term commitments to. I mean, that's what they're after. That's what they're looking for. And so I think that contrast with the consensual forms of non-monogamy is really, really important. sure many people watching this have heard of swinging, right? That's another type of a non-monogamous, non-escalator relationship. A lot of time, there's not much of a relationship at all. We go to parties. We wife swap. We apparently wife swapping, I learned this, started with Air Force pilots during World War II. But that culture is almost exclusively for heterosexual couples that just want to fuck around, and there's no emotional attachment whatsoever. It's all about the sex a lot of times in swinging. It's not always the case. Sometimes swinging breaks out into polyamory, but we'll get to that in a minute. The sort of modern day swinging is consensual non-monogamy. Broad term, it really includes all the other forms of things that aren't cheating. Your partner knows what you're up to. We both agree to a structure and some boundaries regarding what outside relationships should cap out at. And we have some kind of open relationship, but it's still monogamish. And that's a term that's becoming more and more popular for some types of open relationships. So sometimes people have a consensual non-monogamous relationship where you can sext and you can do whatever you want on your device, but I don't want you to be physically intimate with anybody else. We set up that as a boundary. That's still consensual non-monogamy. You're still engaging in relationships with other people. I think that's important. The oldest and, quite frankly, dumbest, most patriarchal, most horrible version of it, not that I have a high opinion of it or anything, is polygamy. I find polygamy, even though it's in the range of quote-unquote consensual non-monogamy, it's only consensual in the structure and the confines of a culture that puts men superior to women. This is almost always universally practiced as one man to many wives. If somebody can point out the counterexamples, I've never really looked into them, but you guys know the cultures. It's throughout the Islamic world, Mormons. You see different religions that have some version of polygamy. It's a very male-dominated and male-focused structure to relationships. It's also very old. We were doing this a lot more back in the day. Polyamory is very, very, very different than polygamy. Hilariously, when I started talking about polyamory somewhat publicly, I had somebody Snapchat me once and ask me how many wives I had. I had to laugh about that a little bit because I'm like, that's not really how it works. And none of your business. But it's not, it's for polyamory is a very, very, very different thing. And I'm going to talk in a minute about why I believe in it. But polyamory takes consensual non-monogamy a step further. And I think it combines the two philosophies that I've been talking about up until now and merges them. It takes this idea that relationships are not uniquely romantic and that what we define as a romantic relationship is, well, quite frankly, poorly defined, and we don't really know what we're talking about. And then it takes the idea of cheating and sexual jealousy and says, let's throw all that out and allow people to be honest and open with everybody all at once in all of their relationships with every involved party. Why are people not into it? Because it's hard. Like, on its face, the way I've just described it, it should sound like one of the simplest, easiest concepts. But there's no question polyamory is the hardest type of relationship structure to maintain because it requires the most trust, the most mutual understanding. It's the most complicated. It's an entirely new way of thinking. All of pop culture is against you. If you come out about this, it's not even a protected thing. You could technically get fired for engaging in a polyamorous relationship because it's not a protected class. The government will not recognize it as such. But it's growing and growing in popularity. And polyamory allows, well, let's just jump ahead here. The attitudes towards this are starting to change. If you look at across years and ages, but we're very, very early on here. A little over 70% of millennials answer at least somewhat agreement that committed couples should be monogamous. That's compared with 90% of the silent / greatest generation, 85% for baby boomers, even Gen X, who were forward thinkers in many, many ways and the heroes of the LGBT movement, and I could go on. Even they're not as open to this as millennials has become. They're more about 75% say that, committed couples should be monogamous. They at least somewhat agree with that. But millennials are a little over 70%, 72, 73, somewhere around there. What's fascinating is admitting themselves that they've been in an open sexual relationship. Millennials are the highest on that. And when it comes to would at least consider an open relationship, millennials and Gen Xers are only in the 15% range. We're the most afraid of this. We don't want to say that people should because we're becoming more and more open-minded, but we're really not ready to engage with it ourselves. We're afraid of it. It's a scary thought to allow our partners that level of freedom to explore other relationships. And it goes back to all the things I talked about in the beginning, our high levels of insecurity, our high levels of worry, worrying about being in other emotional relationships like Jen, you mentioned earlier, These are all really concerning things. So let me tell you why Alex, loves the idea of polyamory. And I will tell you that my wife does not. Her and I have had dozens and dozens of hours of conversation about this. She sees some of the logic, but she's not there yet. And so while this all makes so much sense to me, and it's what I would prefer, for some people, they just don't love the idea. They're not there. But let me give you the reasons for me, why I love polyamory. It allows for any individual the most freedom of expression possible. You can be exactly honest about what you think about your relationship and what you think about other people. It takes all those restrictions off of love and allows you to freely love whomever as much as you see fit. And it's hard to see something wrong with that. I mean, that's just on its face, that's an attractive concept. That's an attractive idea. For me, it's only natural. I was robbed of having any close familial bonds. My family, for people that don't know my backstory, I no longer identify or relate to any of them. They're religious. I already didn't have much of an extended family because my mom was raised in a foster home and, limited aunts and uncles and these kinds of things. Like for me, I didn't have a lot of the close family bonds that people get in their life. And so if I can find those close bonds and build a support system with mutually consenting adults, some physical, some not, some closely emotional, some not, and I'm not harming anyone and I'm being upfront and open and honest with everybody about that and not crossing boundaries without discussing it first, without having that conversation, but I'm still putting my primary partner first, or maybe I don't even have a primary partner. There's a lot of people who have polyamory where they have equal-ish relationships, right? That's natural. That's healthy. That's good. It gives people that freedom. And let me tell you, it creates the most honest and open relationship you could ever imagine. I'm always shocked when Micah and I talk to people. Sometimes they're just shocked at how open and honest we can be with each other. That is born out of a trust that comes with the freedom to know that 3 years in, just because you think somebody else is sexy, just because you think somebody else is maybe more supportive in some ways or offers things that I don't, or maybe you have friendships and other relationships that give you certain things that as a couple you can't give that other person. Being able to be honest about that and yet understand that even despite those things, I'm still the one she wants to spend the most time with. I'm still the one that she wants to share her life with. I'm still the one that she knows that every single day she wakes up is a better day if I'm involved in it than if I wasn't. You can get to that point where you're absolutely certain of that. You can get to that point where you're confident in that. And the other thing is, and I didn't put this on the slide, but it allows me as an individual to be a better person because it's accepting the full responsibility that if there's something wrong in my relationship, it's going to be my fault. It means that if she wants the relationship to end, she had the freedom to do whatever she wanted along the way. I clearly have made too many numerous mistakes that has led to the situation where she no longer wants to continue the relationship. That's on me. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to be on you, right? People have their mental health breakdown. People have all kinds of things come up. Sometimes there's outside pressures. But it does allow for the maximum possible personal improvement. Because it puts the onus back on you. It puts the responsibility back on you to be the best committed partner that you can be. And I think that's really, really powerful. It gives you that opportunity to handle your emotions and communication way better. Am I jealous? Probably means there's an underlying insecurity or fear that I haven't worked out with my partner to be overcome. It's not because they're doing something wrong. It's because I don't feel secure. It takes the blame off and puts the responsibility on me to communicate. I don't need to go through your phone. I need to ask you why it is that I don't feel like we're safe, we're secure right now. I don't feel like you're putting me first. I don't feel like you're spending the time with me that I deserve. And I want to know why. It's the ability to ask those direct questions to each other's faces without argument and understand that we're trying to work on our mutual goals of maintaining our relationship. It allows relationships to reach their natural sweet spot of the proper intensity and frequency that they have. Not way too much, not that crazy passionate love that drives people nuts and causes them to do stupid shit and then they get hooked up for forever because they're had a kid or whatever. We're not trying to do that. We're also not trying to do it too low where we don't, reach those points because of fear of intimacy and restrictions on ourselves and holding back. If you're open and you're honest, you just allow that relationship to hit that sweet spot. And that's really, really big. So I have this sweet spot theory of relationships, as I just hinted to. And the theory is as follows. Relationships have this natural sweet spot they can arrive at based on the compatibility of the two people involved, the practicality of their life circumstances being able to be intermingled and intertwined. That's that merging phase that we talked about on the relationship ladder, and the social acceptance around their relationship. All three of those factors are going to play a role in what that specific relationship will be allowed to be. So here's a proof of concept. Let's put the theory to a test. Think about a friend that you have that your other friends don't like. You might be compatible with them, which is fine. But the practicality of your life circumstances and the social acceptance, two factors, means you're probably not going to get to hang out with that friend very much. And if you do, it's probably going to only be one-on-one because your other friends don't like them, so they're not coming out to the bar tomorrow night. They're not going to be able to come to the Cards Against Humanity at your apartment. Birthday parties are going to be awkward. They might allow them there. And then you have the practicality problem where you want to expand your social circle as much as possible. And so if all of your other friends don't like that other friend, that relationship is naturally going to resonate at a frequency that's a little bit lower than some others. Now think about a friend that everybody likes and that really likes you and that you grow really, really close with. Your compatibility is probably very high. It's probably very practical for you guys to spend a lot of time together. Maybe you live close. Maybe you have very similar interests or a regular thing that you share together. And everybody likes them. So the social acceptance is very, very high. Is it crazy to think that every quote-unquote romantic relationship, even though we've kind of broken down what that even means, has the same natural frequency it could resonate at, even ones that turn sexual and physical? We probably have a set amount of compatibility. Now, granted, if you're willing to get close enough to somebody to be physical and sexual with them, compatibility could be really high or it could actually be really low. Just proving my point earlier, that sex really isn't the game in town that we're worried about here. But let's take the case where it's really, really high. What about practicality of life circumstances? Do both of you have prior obligations? Does one of you have kids? Does one of you have a whole bunch of debt and all kinds of other things that would make them not a good, long-standing partner? Is one of you have different goals? Well, then that particular relationship has a maximum point that it can reach. And then social acceptance. Is our circle of people open to it? Do they think that that's healthy? Are they going to give a shit about it? Are we going to be ostracized for engaging in it? If that starts to come down and the practicality starts to come down, even if we're highly compatible, the relationship should have a much lower sweet spot that's certainly not as intense, not as frequent as something that gets all the way down the relationship escalator. Okay? The flip side is maybe social acceptance is very high. Maybe there's even social pressure, but compatibility is really low. But we got really intense and love fast and sex was super passionate and we jumped into things really, really quickly. But it turned out that the practicality of our relationships intertwining was actually really, really low. Uh-oh. How many people end up spending a long time with somebody like that and having a miserable relationship because their relationship wasn't at a sweet spot? It wasn't at its natural frequency that it should resonate at. These are the kind of problems that I really think have to be worked out and should be thought about as we start to get into new relationships. Many relationships end not because there was nothing left, not because there wasn't more to be had, but because people wanted it to stop at different levels, or there became a conflict with our goals, or we wanted to be on this relationship escalator at different times or not at one at all. And we didn't hit that natural frequency that I'm talking about. We should want to avoid this at all costs. Most of the time relationships end, it is filled with massive hurt and pain. We went too fast, or we went too slow. And because of that, certain things either got put on hold or got messed up. We overcommitted, and now it's impacted our other relationships. Relationships like this, they end in pain because we went too fast or we went too slow for one of the individuals or both of the individuals, but we both still valued it and wanted something more overall. Otherwise, it wouldn't have hurt. It hurts because there was something there. How many times do we say that? I thought we had something. I thought we had something. What does that mean? It means you did. You just didn't hit the natural frequency that your relationship was supposed to resonate at. And because we practice serial monogamy as a culture, you're not allowed to leave that relationship at that frequency, at its point on its escalator, and pursue other relationships. Polyamory cuts through all of that and doesn't have any of those conflicts. It eliminates all of these problems. It allows relationships to hit their sweet spot and stay there. And that is really fucking cool. Regardless of what you think about it, regardless of how counterintuitive it is, I have to be making sense to you a little bit at this point. We've talked about a lot of different things. I really hope I was able to open your mind a little bit and see relationships in a deeper and more self-actualized way. No matter what, I made the case in this video for polyamory as the answer to a lot of these problems. But I have to stress, it's not everybody's answer. What should be absolutely clear from this, and what I hope you will consider, is being more open and honest in all of your relationships. With your friends, with your significant other, with your family, with your loved ones, whoever. I hope it's clearly obvious, putting all of these facts together, that the biggest evil you can face in your relationship is not knowing what each other's boundaries are and not being honest about it. We have to be honest or we will fail. We need to know, are we on a relationship escalator? Do we have the same goals? And don't be afraid to have this discussion. All you are doing, if you don't talk about the relationship escalator and the end point and what could happen, the only thing you are doing is you are putting off pain and misery for down the road. Because you're trying to hold on to something, this natural frequency that you can reach with your relationship, and you want it to be there, but there's a mismatch between what you want to have happen and what your end goal is. And that's okay. Knowing is way better than not knowing. Please trust me on this. My own personal story, I started thinking about this because I cheated for the first time. I had always seen myself as a faithful person. I had always seen myself as a person who would be committed for the long haul in any relationship I was in. And I couldn't forgive myself for what I had done. I never felt more guilt for anything in my life. I violated somebody I valued's trust. It fucking hurt. But it got me thinking, and it got me thinking deeply. And 5 years plus of a whole lot more experiences since then, and a whole lot has changed. 5 years plus, I developed this idea, this system, this concept, and I put it all together. And it's been piece by piece. Most of it has come through discussion and discovery and trial and error. It hasn't always gone well. But it's been so much more fulfilling to explore it openly and honestly than what I did before. And I know that many of people are in this boat where they don't really think about it. They assume everybody wants the same thing out of relationships than them. They assume relationships start and end the same way, under the same conditions. And they don't really think about why they fail. They don't really think about why they might succeed. And they go into them and hope that the status quo will be maintained and that their partner will be faithful. I want to remind us of those statistics from earlier. 70% don't discuss what cheating means, but 5%, only 5% think they will have to deal with an infidelity in their relationship. Yet so many people say that an infidelity would be the end of their relationship. That's like 75%. So we don't talk about what it is or what it means. We don't talk about what would take for it to occur, for us to be sure. And we're just sure that it won't happen to us. And yet, the statistics show that 75% of us would do it if we would never get caught, and about 50% of us do. It's universally practiced, even though it's universally condemned. We have to do better. We have to be more honest with each other. We've got to avoid this and avoid the pain and avoid the hurt and think of relationships in a new way. And I really appreciate everybody who came to this and listened. And for those of you that listen down the road on YouTube, this has been the culmination of my thinking and putting it all together again over the course of 5+ years to come up with this. And if you've got counter arguments, if you think I didn't make sense, if there's anything you disagree with, I want to talk about that too. Comment me, find me, come to my Facebook page, do whatever. If you found this incredibly valuable and think that other people are having relationships that could really benefit from hearing this, I mean, it's a little bit of a public service announcement. It will be on YouTube, hopefully within the next 2 hours. Please share it. Please. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to people that matter to you, and talk to your significant other about being more open and being more honest and asking these hard questions. You can't lose. You only lose when you hide and pretend that it won't happen to you. And thank you, Jen. I really appreciated that you were here for the whole thing. It was a great conversation. I love you. I love everybody who's going to watch us down the road. And